Good morning from Denver. Good evening in India. And I know Ravi has already reached to Pennsylvania. So good morning to him in Pennsylvania. And thanks for being here. I know many of you are very busy on Sundays, but this has been an excellent opportunity to get together and listen to Dr. Kumar Murthy talk about his favorite topic there. Well, I think all of you have been familiar with SIA, so I won't go through the usual introduction of SIA, but we do want to announce a few things that we are very excited about our Houston conference next month on November 15th and 16th. So try to be there if you are in that area, or if you want to come to Houston, that will be great. And I know Dr. Ramamurthy has promised us halfway that he's going to be there. So we look forward to seeing him there. Make it if we'll. So that Ajit Ranade has promised us halfway that he might come to Houston. And if he does, that will be great as well. Very good. Well, with that as an introduction, let's get started. So the floor is yours, Dr. Moa. Before I do that, let me pass it on to Dr. Ravindra Kulkarni to introduce the speaker, and then we'll start it. Okay.
Yeah, good morning, all of you. Professor Kumar Murthy is the younger brother of Professor Ram Murthy, who gave an SIA webinar 2 months ago. It's very rare that for two brothers in the same family follow the same career path and attain very high excellence in the same field. The Indian diaspora in Canada, I said that last time also when I spoke about Ram Murthy, in the last 70 years, this Indian diaspora has produced really, they are still young compared with me, three world-class mathematicians, Professor Ram Murthy from Queen's University, Professor Kumar Murthy from University of Toronto, and Professor Manjul Bhargava from Princeton University. And they have contributed really enormously to number theory, arithmetic geometry, and many computer applications. In addition, Professor Kumar Murthy has contributed enormously to the organizational aspects of the math community, both in Canada and in India, and I suppose also in the US. Lately, he was the director of the Fields Institute, and that was in the very difficult Corona years. And well, he has gotten many kudos for his excellent directorship there. Then he and I worked, we were associated with the Ramanujan Math Society in India for over 2 decades. He was the editor of the Journal of the Ramanujan Math Society. And well, besides that, he is the founder of the Ganit Lab. And I didn't know until I saw his resume yesterday that he has patents. It's very rare for a pure mathematician to get patents. But he's the founder of the Ganit Lab, Prata Technologies, and Perfect Cloud. In pure mathematics, he has contributed more than 150 papers and 10 books. Besides, I know he's a very deeply philosophical person. He is associated with the Ramakrishna Mission in many ways in Toronto. Then, well, his topic today is also, I suppose, outgrowth of his interest in philosophy. He's going to talk about social change triangle, learning, innovation, and inequality. And I'm really looking forward to what he will be speaking on this issue of smart cities in this webinar. Yeah.
Right.
Kumar,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can share the screen. How's this? Can you see
There we
this?
go.
Yes, yes.
Looks
Okay,
very good.
excellent. Excellent. Okay. And then
Yes, I can
let
see
me
it.
also make sure that when I change the slide, you can see the slide. Do you see the next slide now?
Yeah,
Yes,
very
three
good.
Okay.
heroes of food
Okay.
security.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Very good. Okay. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here today. Um, when Ravi asked for a possible talk, I gave two options. One was a talk about number theory, basically problems that arise in number theory, and the other one was this, where I'm trying to think or trying to understand um, the whole concept of a smart community, and especially what I call this social change triangle. So let me try to explain this, at least my understanding of it, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it. Okay, so before we start, I want to point out that there are last year, 2023, three very great people passed away. They are M.S. Swaminathan, Meleke Oreri, and Gordon Conway. And all three of them were active in the issue of food security for the world. So Swaminathan, Professor Swaminathan, as many of you know, he was a key person in the Green Revolution in India. He understood the theory of Borlaug about this Green Revolution and adapted it for India, and in the result, must have saved millions of lives in making India self-sufficient in food by 1971. Meleka Woredi is an Ethiopian scientist. He is a person who's been advocating the importance of using local seeds to improve agricultural output and emphasizing biodiversity so that if something goes wrong with some globally manufactured seed, it doesn't wipe out the whole world food supply. And Gordon Conway is a British scientist. He's also been a champion of sustainable agriculture and food resiliency. Oddly enough, all three passed away in 2023. Food security is one of the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, of which there are 17. These goals were formulated, I believe, in 2015, and a very ambitious idea is that they be realized by 2030. And I say very ambitious because once you start looking at what these goals are, you'll realize they're quite daunting. So food security and resiliency is the second of the 17 goals, SDG number 2. SDG number 1 is the end of poverty, to eradicate poverty in the world. And this whole talk is motivated by SDG number 1, the end of poverty. So firstly, what is poverty? We don't have good definitions. There are various definitions. Some are given on a sort of international scale in terms of amount of income per day. So then there are more nuanced definitions which say, well, look, poverty really depends on the society that you live in. You know, what is the socially acceptable amount of money or material possessions that you need to have to live a reasonable life? Lots of undefined words even in that statement, but there are between these two extremes there are various different ways of defining poverty. But however we define it, somehow we seem to be able to recognize it, at least locally. And there have been efforts both at the local level, by national level, governments, NGOs, world bodies such as the United Nations or the IMF and so on, to try to address poverty. And we can't say that, I mean, I believe these are all well-intentioned, and so they've had some good effect, perhaps also some bad effects, partly because their policy, they tend to be policy driven, and policies in the aggregate may not be nuanced enough to understand what is really needed at the local level. So whether they're good or bad, if one thing is clear, poverty has not been eliminated. And in terms of the scale of the problem, much more remains to be done. Amongst the various solutions that have been proposed, one is by Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia. He wrote a book called The End of Poverty. Yeah, I'll say a little bit more about what his ideas, but But his idea and practically all of the other approaches that have been taken are quite interventionist in the way they approach the question of poverty. We want to discuss the problem from a more endogenous perspective. In other words, the solution is coming from within the community. Poverty, as I just said, even in defining it, has to be given in a certain social context. So in discussing poverty, we will also have to discuss the structure of communities. And I'll describe to you very coarsely the spectrum on which that structure can be specified. And I really do believe, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I think only an endogenous approach will be fruitful. In other words, the problem of poverty has to be solved from within the community by people who are firsthand experiencing it firsthand or observing it firsthand. Not only will that make it more likely to be effective, but we have another issue at hand, which interventions normally don't appreciate or take into account. Namely, you need a scalable solution, not an ad hoc interventionist solution. So in this context of studying the structure of communities, I want to talk a little bit about smart communities, because this is a topic that's been discussed all over the world. Governments are very keen on this. They're just plunging headlong into trying to make it happen, create smart cities, for example. I'm going to talk about more than just smart cities. It's all a move towards is there an optimal way to engineer a community, social engineering? And if there is such an optimal community, how do we build it? So these are being studied, as I said, all around the world. Most of the time, when people talk about smart cities, for example, they mean integrated infrastructure. So they want the energy grid to talk to the road system, to talk to the health system, maybe to government. All of these different information systems that are part of the infrastructure of a city need, they think, to be integrated and work together to provide a whole experience for the citizens. That's what they mean by a smart city. I remember some years ago, in University of Toronto, the School of Cities was just being established, and the president convened a meeting of a bunch of people. I'm not sure why I was asked to be at that meeting, but anyway, I was. And as I heard this conversation about smart cities, I realized that there's something missing here. You see, if we're talking about integrated infrastructure, then what do you do with communities that don't have any infrastructure? What does smart mean for them? So this was a question that bothered me at the time. So as I said, there's a whole spectrum of communities. At one end, at the left-hand end, you have the urban core, and then the urban. Then you go to the suburban. Then you go to the peri-urban, and then to the rural communities. And we don't actually even have good definitions of all of these, but again, we can sort of recognize them when we see them. And when we talk about smart cities, we're entirely in the urban context because that's where we have all the infrastructure that can be integrated. But as we move out further to peri-urban and rural, it becomes less clear what a smart community means. So as I said, definitions are hard to come by. And if I take even the coarsest thing of comparing the two extremes, rural versus urban, all the definitions of rural that we have, that I am aware of anyway, have to do with the size and location of the community. I hear some, as I was saying, hey, the definitions are a big gap here, and there's more work to be done in trying to come up with definitions. But all the definitions that I've seen of rural have to do with the size and the location of the community. They say it's rural if it's not in a town or a city, or if it has low population or low population density. But however you define it, there are approximately 3 billion people. 3 billion people live in rural communities. The population of the world is about, what, 8 billion? So this is a significant number of people that we're talking about. No. Can you still see my screen? Yeah, okay, good. And do tell me if the slides aren't advancing for any reason. Okay, no. So 3 billion people are living in rural communities, but there's a move to urbanization, and it's not something that's been happening recently. It's been happening for many decades. In 1950, 29% of the world population was urban. 2010, more than 50% was urban. And according to these trends, if they continue in the same way, then by 2050, 70% of the world will be in urban centers. And this growth is not happening uniformly. It's Africa and Asia that's leading the growth. The cities in Africa and Asia are growing at an amazing rate. Some people say Lagos, Nigeria, is going to be the largest city in the world in some number of years. When they make these predictions, I repeat that they're assuming that current trends will continue. We don't know that that's even possible. What if will civil infrastructure collapse before we even get to that point? But anyway, these are the predictions. So why is this move towards urbanization? How did we get to this state of affairs? Because there was a time some centuries ago, I think, when efficiency of production of goods required physical proximity. You needed the raw material, you needed labor, you needed capital, you need means of production, had to be physically in one place because of delays would be costly. So you needed to get everything in one place. And this sort of situation, so the community grew around the factory, basically. And this continued beyond the factory, beyond production of goods to provision of services and just as a place to live because there were perceived efficiencies of scale. So this is how large urban communities came to be in a very simplified way. And if you look at when we say efficiencies of scale, what is it? It means that we have the impression that increased activity or besides now you have a large number of people living in these urban environments, so there's more activity, and this gives also the impression of more opportunity in all aspects of life, whether it's in employment or in your personal life. Maybe somebody told me once, so why do you like they live in San Francisco? Oh, San Francisco is so great. Why? Oh, there are nice concerts and museums there. So you get these other opportunities. They're not employment opportunities, but the other aspects of life that seem to aggregate in an urban environment. But it seems to me if we're looking at the global crises that we're facing, it's time for a rethinking of this point of view, of this whole efficiency equation, taking into account hidden costs. When we said, for example, the old idea of aggregate everything physically was because of economies of scale, are we taking all the costs really into account in doing this? By the way, I just make a footnote here, but it'll come up again and again. But I'm not advocating turning the clock back. I'm not advocating that, although I do personally feel cities are a sociological error, but we have them now. We are used to a certain quality of life or a certain level of living, and so we need to figure out how we maintain that or even expand that while at the same time addressing the big issues like poverty and other costs that are involved. So amongst these hidden costs, there's the environmental impact. These are figures from the OECD that show urban emissions, or rather emissions from communities. The blue at the bottom is OECD cities. The green in the middle is non-OECD cities. And the transparent one is the non-urban areas. And if you look at it closely, what you'll see is the most significant growth in carbon emissions is going to come from non-OECD cities, not from the non-urban areas or from the OECD cities. So if cities are going to continue to grow at the rate that they're growing, our climate issues are going to get more difficult, not less difficult to address. So there is a world outside of urban centers. I just said about 3 billion people live outside of urban centers, and a lot of villages are considered urban. More than 1 million villages in China, more than 600,000 in India. North and South America have a lot of villages. A lot of the indigenous communities live there. We can ask if this move towards urbanization, what's the future of these communities? So here is a famous quotation of Mahatma Gandhi. He was speaking in London. Um, and I don't know, sorry, I don't think he was speaking in London. This photograph happens to be from him in London. But
Hmm.
he said, in the context of India, this is what he said: we are inheritors of a rural civilization. The vastness of our country, the vastness of the population, the situation and the climate of the country have, in my opinion, destined it for a rural civilization. To uproot it and substitute for it an urban civilization seems to me an impossibility. Again, I think even he is not talking about accepting a lower quality of life or anything like that. He's just talking about the way human communities are organized, rural versus urban. Okay, there's been a lot of work around the world in trying to what people call bridging the rural-urban divide. Why? Because of the difference in perceived quality of life, that the amenities that are available in the urban environment are not available in the rural environment, and what should we do about it? So the European Union has a major initiative that way. Jeffrey Sachs, I think I mentioned him already, his so-called Millennium Villages project. The IEEE is busy working on the smart grid. How do you empower electricity off the grid? Abdul Kalam has his famous Pura project that is providing urban amenities to rural areas. And at U of T also, we've started at the Fields Institute, we started a group on smart villages. We've published one book in Springer where we give different points of view about smart villages. So the point, of course, in comparing the rural and the urban, there's both a challenge and an opportunity. People who are in the rural environment, and even we who are not in the rural environment, can understand that it's not just that somehow the rural environment is in need of great help, and we just transplant what we have in the urban environment there. That won't work. There is a cultural identity there. There's perhaps better quality of environment. On the other hand, they're missing income, they're missing services. For the cities, for the urban areas, there's opportunity in working with the rural communities because there could be a source of talent, could be a source of markets. And I personally don't feel that we are going to get global prosperity or global peace unless rural communities are also part of our economic equation. But around the world, anyway, people are beginning to take note. As I said, um, I'm going to show you some of those initiatives in a moment. One thing I want to point out is rural and agrarian are not the same thing. Sometimes we think that rural means necessarily agrarian. No, it need not be. It's not to underestimate the importance of the agrarian aspect of community. We spoke about SDG number 2, it is food security. So certainly you need the agrarian activity worldwide is very important, but rural may not be the same thing. So we need to broaden our perspective on the nature of a rural community. So I said there were activities worldwide to try to bridge the rural-urban divide. In the European Union, what they're doing is trying to offer digital connectivity. So they're trying to get the internet basically into rural communities. And they hope that that will spark an increase in jobs, basic services, and a climate of entrepreneurship, quality of life, and so on. There's a European network for rural development. But of course, the theme that I want to make sure we all may take note of is technology is only one part. See, is connectivity enough? By the way, in Abdul Kalam's solution of Pura, also he stresses the importance of connectivity, but he gives a more nuanced thing. It's not just about technical connectivity, he means in other ways as well. So this approach that suggests that once digital connectivity is provided, the gap between rural and urban prosperity will be narrowed, may be a little short-sighted. I mean, we certainly know just because there's digital connectivity doesn't mean that the quality of life is high. We have such a thing as device abuse. People talk about substance abuse. I should talking about device abuse. You see in the picture in the top of the screen, all of these people are staring at their devices, and this is not just a cartoon. I mean, this is actually what we see when we move around. People almost all will bump into you because they're busy looking at the device, not looking where they're going. And more generally, technology may not be enough. And I'm not saying this, I certainly am not a Luddite. I like technology. I like new technology, new technological solutions. And the person in the picture you see below, Jeff Hinton, is also not a Luddite, having played an important role in the movement in the practical uses of artificial intelligence. But people are recognizing technology is not enough. There's something more is needed. So Jeffrey Sachs, who I've alluded to a couple of times now, he has this Millennium Villages project. He wants to address the root causes of extreme poverty. And his approach is to take a holistic community-led approach, that's good. In other words, it's not just about income, it's about all these other things that go to make up a quality of life in a community. His project actually has run into serious problems, partly because to get it going, he needs a huge infusion of capital. And I don't think that he has been able to sustain that. I told you about the IEEE. They're working on green energy in rural environments. And so their idea is that development will be advanced, development goals will be advanced if they're able to move away from fossil fuels. There's certainly nothing to argue there. That's a good project, but it's not the whole of development. Then there's Abdul Kalam's Pura idea. This is a book, Target 3 billion. He's talking about the 3 billion that live in rural areas. And again, he feels that by providing urban amenities to rural areas, we will make a lot of progress towards global peace and prosperity. So we've been studying this at the Fields Institute. When I was director there, I started an annual conference on smart villages. And when we first conference was held in 2017, then the attendees were the ones you see pictured there. Were about not even 20 people came to that. But we studied various themes. In particular, one of the participants in the first conference was this guy Solomon Darwin from Berkeley. And they have their own approach. They're already in the field. They have their own approach of what they mean by a smart village. As you can see, there is connectivity, there is medical care, education, employment opportunities, investment opportunities, and also a compassionate community, that he says. I like this book by Schumacher very much. It's Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered. So here in this book, he talks about Buddhist economics. He talks about Buddhist economics because I think he was only familiar with Buddha. But anyway, the idea is it's a way of looking at economics in which a person has a chance to utilize and develop their faculties to enable them to overcome their ego-centeredness by joining with other people in a common task and to bring forth the goods and services needed for a becoming existence. So here you notice Solomon Darwin is a Christian and he's talking about compassion, compassionate community. This guy is taking Schumacher is taking a Buddhist approach. He wants to overcome ego-centeredness and join with other people in a common task. Both are laudable approaches which go beyond the technological aspects of development. So this whole business about what both of them talk about, the compassionate community and working together with people, is speaks to the relationship between the individual and the community. From old times, Buddha or Aristotle, there's importance given to what is the purpose of community, what is the purpose of society, or what does it do to the individual, what growth and what development happens for the individual. So Aristotle's view is that the purpose of community is to enable its members to live a life of virtue. That's what he said. The purpose of community is to enable its members to live a life of virtue. And of course, Aristotle was several centuries after Buddha. So Buddha also spoke about something like that. But this is to be done, we live a life of virtue in a way that brings about social good. Now I'll come back to what Aristotle said in a moment, but because I mentioned this in one of the Smart Community conferences, and by the way, by 2018 the conference grew a lot bigger, and it was attracting close more than 100 people. So the topic is certainly resonating with people. Okay, let's go back to Aristotle. He said that the purpose of a community is to enable individuals to live a life of virtue. In other words, there has to be personal growth towards some sort of higher ideal. However, one thing that sets Aristotle apart from maybe what we might consider a modern perspective is that he felt that's a good ideal which cannot be realized for the masses. And so only a smart part of the population would have access to this. The rest of the population should engage in the manual labor needed to support the leisure of the privileged few. So yes, the purpose of the community is to develop virtue, but unfortunately, it's not possible for everybody. And so there should be a large part of the community that services the people who are trying to live a life of virtue. So you can tell um, that kind of ideology is probably would not be very well received today. This is Mahbub al-Haq. He's an economist, Pakistani economist. He he active in the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. He led and perhaps initiated the Human Development Reports. And he says the real wealth of a nation is its people. And the purpose of development is to create an enabling environment for people to enjoy long, healthy, and creative life. So here we see in development, we are the losers if we exclude anybody, because we need the wealth of the country from which all the ideas and the solutions are going to come from have to be part of the equation, have to be part of the process. So this is more a modern point of view, I think. Moreover, when we look at development, how healthy is the development? There's a tendency globally to talk about GDP, gross domestic product. But also people understand that measuring development in terms of an aggregated number, such as the GDP, conceals a lot of things that are going wrong behind the scenes, in particular, inequality of distribution, quality of life, and so on. So some years ago, Amartya Sen proposed something called the capabilities approach, which speaks more to the quality of life of an individual, not aggregated, but for an individual. Of course, once you talk about an individual, this becomes incredibly complex, maybe impossibly complex to build any significant theory on, but that's the ideal. Now, in talking about GDP, one shout out to the mathematicians who are listening. This issue is really ripe for us to get involved in, because right now we're in a much better state with respect to data science than we were when economists were looking at this some time ago. See, the tendency to reduce everything to a single number is, if you don't have a single number, how are you going to compare things? How are you going to scale things in terms of different achievements in different communities? Well, we are okay with multidimensional data. We already know how to do the algebraic topology gives you new methods for dealing with high dimensional data. Machine learning approaches give you a nuanced way of dealing with high dimensional data. The Human Development Index, which is something that Amartya Sen is responsible for, started trying to measure the quality of development of a community in terms other than the GDP. So this was a number that was computed in terms, and for the inputs were the amount of, it does involve income, average income per person, but also average number of years of schooling, of education, and also average health. But then they have these three numbers, and then what they did is they take the geometric mean. So they have a single number, and then they compare countries with respect to the. Now, we would say you don't need to take the geometric mean. You don't need to do anything with the number. You can just do a cluster analysis on this data, and you get a slightly more nuanced spread of countries with respect to human development than the United Nations gives us now. Besides the mathematical developments, we can ask whether the foundation of the economic approach is valid. Is income or production the only metric by which to evaluate the extent of development in a society? So Sen's idea of this capabilities approach is to ask, what are people actually able to do and to be? Say, Aristotle was saying, we want people to be able to live a life of virtue. Okay, whatever virtue may mean, can we take it more generally? Do people have opportunities, a rich array of opportunities to develop themselves as they wish? Can we measure the well-being of a society, the advancement of a society in terms of these capabilities? And then some additional aspects were added by Martha Nussbaum of Chicago, where, again, measurement is quality of life is determined in terms of what each person is able to do and to be. She added some issues of social justice, social injustice, inequality, and so on, in trying to bring that into the capabilities approach. Now, the approach is an interesting one, an important one, because I like it because it puts human beings at the center of the equation, their quality of life, their aspirations. I disagree a little bit with their approach, maybe in three different ways. Firstly, both of them are stressing a normative framework. I don't like normative frameworks in general. I think whenever human beings are involved, it has to be much more nuanced than that. So I'd prefer an endogenous framework. Moreover, they are still going to, I think, a national level, but we need a granular approach. Societies are different. Villages are different from cities, and we need a more granular approach at the community level to understand what capabilities are. And then the third thing is society is very dynamic. It's not static. Even if I'm talking about a single community, it's not a static community. It's constantly changing. And we need to be able to recognize that in our evaluation of capabilities. So the future village, as I view it, is there. It's for the purpose of empowering each individual to discover and manifest their possibilities. Some of you know that I just finished a book on the science of human possibilities. And the natural sequel to that would be to explain how possibilities can be turned into capabilities. To do this, though, infrastructure is necessary, but it's not enough. Neither physical infrastructure nor cyber infrastructure. Most importantly, we have to help people to manifest their creative genius. And then we will find the solution to the scalability problem. Remember, I told you before that a lot of these interventions were ad hoc, and I don't see how they would scale. The only way this is going to scale is when you take an endogenous, people-centric approach. Then people become the solution, not the problem. They themselves will solve it. So I want to propose what I call the social change triangle. It has three vertices: learning, innovation, and inequality. So this is the title of the talk. Let me talk a little bit about each of these. First for learning. Learning I define as actionable knowledge. So not all knowledge counts as learning. I claim that it's the new capital. And I'm venturing in on thin ice here. I'm not an economist, but I'm going to try to explain this. That I think learning is the new capital, and I've listed a few of the attributes of capital and tried to state that learning does have those attributes. There's a book by Thomas Piketty called Capital in the 21st Century. There he analyzes Adam Smith and Karl Marx's views about capital. Marx in particular makes the point that capital is conceptualized differently according to changes in history and geography. Piketty says that economic growth since the 18th century has been also accompanied with the growth in inequality. So our view is that learning is the new capital, and if economic prosperity depends on the availability of capital, then we need to tap into this whole thing of learning. And then the question becomes, what is a learning society? What is a society in which there's an abundance of learning? So learning is firstly not confined to an institution. It's not about being in a school or a classroom. It's a lifelong process. We even have to learn to learn. As I said, it is something that has to embrace, we have to embrace in the entirety of our life. There's, of course, formal education, primary, secondary, tertiary. There are skills. There is education that is learning that is relevant to the community we are in, whether we're in a rural or an urban environment or what we aspire for. And there's learning not just at the individual level, but for families and for institutions as well. This is James Heckman from Chicago, Nobel Prize winner, who embraced this idea of human capabilities, but he pointed out that we need to do this at an early stage. There's a question here, I see. Rohit?
Rohit, you have to unmute yourself, please. You have to unmute, Rohit.
Yes, yes.
Rohit, you have to unmute yourself, please. You have to unmute yourself, please. Rohit, you have to unmute yourself, please. 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 You have to
I didn't mean to interrupt his talk. I was just putting myself at the head of the line. Please let him continue.
Okay, okay,
Okay.
okay. So Heckman, interesting. So you see, a point is, I just want to say that this point of view of learning as a new capital means that what we need to invest our resources and our attention on when we talk about development is more in creating learning opportunities. And Heckman is saying that this point that learning takes place even outside the institution, he says, in fact, let's concentrate on birth to age 5 to develop this learning outside of the school. And that is where we need the heaviest investment of effort. And it's not only cognitive skills, but also social skills. I found this very interesting that for the first time I was seeing economists talk about character, the importance of building character as an asset that's going to be developed towards our development goals. Okay, so that's, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go a little faster. That's learning. Next is innovation. As I said, what we're trying to do is create an endogenous solution. So people have to solve their own problems. And for that, they need to do something different than what they were doing before. That is innovate. Again, social scientists are constantly discussing what innovation means. But we will define innovation as productized learning. Learning is actionable knowledge. Innovation is productized learning. Okay, so there's in education, people know that there's a positive correlation between innovation and the availability of highly educated labor, highly skilled people. Where I repeat, we don't need to think of educated or skilled in terms of formal education or formal skilling, but having learning. And we need both theory and actionable knowledge, though I'm emphasizing actionable knowledge in the economic model. And to sustain an innovative culture requires more nuanced education. Okay, this is Phelps, who wrote a book, Edmund Phelps, he wrote a book called Mass Flourishing. I think it's in response to Aristotle, who felt that only a limited few could flourish. So he's trying to tell us that prosperity is a result of pervasive indigenous innovation, that is local innovation. I contrast this with Schumpeter, whose theory is that innovation comes from exogenous rather than from outside, rather than endogenous discovery. But the point is that we really cannot import innovation. It has to, nor can we legislate it. It has to be something that grows from within. Now, the question is, I think economists have been discussing for a long time, what's the connection between innovation and inequality? Does innovation necessarily lead to inequality? Piketty says yes. But here I want to talk a little bit about not all inequality is bad or not all inequality is the same. I want to distinguish between static and dynamic inequality. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But inequality, I'm giving you a couple of metaphors. I said learning is the new capital. I said innovation is productized learning. Now I'm going to define inequality as the waste product from turning learning into innovation. And some of that waste product is toxic. And that is what is called static inequality. And if you don't deal with that toxic waste, it will destabilize the entire innovative process. Okay, so economists have also been thinking about inequality. This is Galbraith. He's talking in the 50s. He says mass deprivation remains the most shocking aberration of modern times, and it's only gotten a lot worse since Galbraith said this. The issue about inequality is not just a moral or a philosophical or an ethical issue; it's an economic issue also. This is Stiglitz. Many economists also have written about the price we're paying for allowing inequality to continue. It has a significant economic drag. There's of course always debate about what inequality is. Most of inequality is centers around income inequality, but of course that's too narrow a focus. We need to think about happiness, opportunities, needs fulfillment, and so on. There's a more nuanced approach needed. Amartya Sen has written a lot about inequality. In fact, he has a book called Inequality Re-Examined. to emphasize this nuanced way of thinking about it. And he asks some provocative questions. Given there are many variables, which variable are we talking about? And a given variable, is equality really desired? If you have equality in one variable, maybe it will imply inequality in another variable, and he gives some examples of that. Okay. But all of these things point to the fact that innovation is, if it's producing any kind of toxic waste, it has to be tempered in some way with something. And the something, I say, is social concern. Otherwise, it'll breed static inequality. I said that not all inequality is bad. For example, the fact that air pressure is not the same everywhere is what makes possible wind. So the difference in air pressure is actually good for us, and it makes wind possible. Or similarly with supply and demand, because if everybody had the same thing and want the same thing, then there's no economic activity. So not all inequality is bad. It's only when it's become static inequality that we see a stunting of growth. Okay. So here's a question. The cities by their nature engender static inequalities. Stiglitz has another book, this time with Greenwald, called Creating a Learning Society. And here he's trying to explain how we come up with development strategies that focus on knowledge and its flow in society. The importance of this is that the way you deal with this toxic waste of static inequality, I think, is not so much by regulating innovation, but by making learning richer. And what do I mean by making learning richer? It's what Vivekananda said. Education, or you can call it learning here, which does not help the common mass of people to equip themselves for the struggle for life, which does not bring out strength of character, spirit of philanthropy, and the courage of a lion, is it worth the name? Real education is that which enables one to stand on one's own legs. So what he's saying is that in this triangle that we have of learning, innovation, and equality, learning is actionable knowledge. Productizing it becomes innovation. It produces inequality. Some of that inequality is toxic. How are you going to neutralize that toxic waste? If you take a page from the mining industry, companies go into to mine and they pollute the environment, they do something, and then the governments regulate them, say you have to clean up your mess. I would say that really the way to deal with the toxic waste here is not so, of course, innovation has to be informed of that, but really the source is here in the learning, that our learning has to be more complete than an ability. It has to be something that embeds my ability in a social context that promotes social cohesion, which, as Vivekananda says, it's not only that I'm able to do something, that I know something, but it has to bring out something bigger within me that enables me to have a bigger view of myself and of the community that I live in. So once again, the social change triangle is this: learning is actionable knowledge. It's the new capital. Innovation is productized learning. The process of productizing learning creates a waste product, namely inequality. Static inequality is a toxic waste, and it can be neutralized not by regulating innovation, but by expanding the scope of learning to promote social concern. So if we do this, I think we will have not only smart villages, but we'll have a smarter world where we have free flow of learning as a foundation for smart architecture. We can use it to minimize static social inequality through an endogenous approach that will scale. And the scalability, by the way, is a piece of mathematics that I didn't have time to discuss. It's a graph theory problem that Ram and I worked on a little bit. And finally, so then from this point of view, what is a smart community? It's a model of social organization which maximizes the flow of learning and minimizes static social inequality. Thank you.
Very good. That was wonderful, Dr. Murthy. There is inequality of talents. You both brothers have all the talents of presentations, and that is an acceptable inequality. My point is well made. Some inequality is absolutely necessary. Actually, I would love to hear more about your annual conference, and hopefully I will be able to attend it if I'm invited. But that said, I'm going to go to Rohit Parikh right away because he is the one who jumped first for the questions asked us. So after that, I do have some comments and questions as well. So Rohit, it is all yours now.
Well, thank you very much. It seems to me that you covered a lot of ground and you did not stick with just one point of view, but that you were considering other points of view. For example, even though you're interested in decreasing inequality, you also considered that some kinds of inequality may in fact be good for society, right? I want to point out two things. One of them, that when you talked about the capability approach, then you mentioned two very important names, the two founders being Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, and surely you're aware of the fact that there are some differences between them because Martha Nussbaum has what I would call the Ten Commandments, and Amartya Sen disagrees with the Ten Commandments because he believes that the goals for society should be flexible, and then ultimately it's up to the society to decide what the Ten Commandments are. Right now, I want to say two things. One of them is, of course, I'm opposed to inequality or decreasing it as a slogan because I have a feeling that among the 10 people who are present here, not a single one other than me knows a proof of the Gödel incompleteness theorem. And therefore, this is an inequality, and perhaps it could be remedied by everyone, all the other 9 people, learning a proof of the Gödel theorem, because otherwise we'll have less inequality. I'm deliberately choosing an absurd example, but let's choose just to point out that equality as a goal is very often when people say that they're opposed to inequality, what they really mean is that they're opposed to insufficiency. In other words, if you don't have enough food, that's insufficiency. If you don't have health care, that's insufficiency. But if I'm able to give a concert in Carnegie Hall and you're not able to give a concert in Carnegie Hall, that's not inequality that should be remedied. And the trouble with the word inequality is that it conflates all kinds of differences into one goal. Whereas that way, I would say that Martha Nussbaum's 10 points are very important because I think that she's not promoting equality, but she's talking about sufficiency in 10 different areas. One more comment, and then I'll stop. The other comment is that you use two pejorative terms for the past. One of them was setting back the clock, and the other one was Luddite. But that creates a kind of a presumption that the present is better than the past, and it's not clear because it would imply that those people who believe in Ram Rajya are simply Neanderthals and they should be put aside. But in fact, we really have to ask ourselves the question whether Ram was a good king, or we can ask whether Akbar was a good king, or whether Ashok was a good king, and should we just neglect these people as Luddites, or should we say we have to mix the past and the present? After all, many of the great achievements of India in philosophy were in the past, and we have to consider the fact that the past may have some wonderful things to teach us, right? Okay, so I've spoken enough, and I have more to say, but I won't say it. Thank you.
So could I just say on the last point you made, I'm in total agreement. I mean, the point is, it's not so much. I wouldn't even take it as simply as was Ram a good king or was Ashoka a good king, but what are the greatness of what they did that I can absorb now and use it in both in terms of my personal well-being and in terms of the well-being of society. What can I learn from them? Absolutely. I mean, that's the greatness of the humanity that distinguishes us, I think, from other species. And if any other species were to get this facility, they would start ruling the world. Is that we learn, there's an accumulation of knowledge. We don't cut off the knowledge that has been accumulated in the past. We rather try to benefit by it, and so that's why we are able to go as far as we are, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. But absolutely, I mean, I only use the word Luddite because I find in giving these talks now, I've done in a couple of situations, automatically people will position you or label you in a certain way. Oh, he's talking about villages, that means he must be anti this. Or I'm trying to tell you, no, actually, we are where we are. We want to have a better life. Moreover, the world is in serious need of help because there are crises that are about to overtake us. Right now, we need to take all the help we can get, put it all together, and especially involve as many people as we can, enable them to live a quality of life so that they can also contribute to the prosperity of all of us.
Thank you. Just one more point. But just one more point, and then I'll really stop. Namely, that if you take the Buddha seriously, then for the Buddha, the highest goal is enlightenment. And enlightenment is something, especially in the Theravada branch of Buddhism, is something that a person can achieve by himself. You need enough food, but you can even get that food by begging. And you need clothing, but as we know from Gandhiji, you don't need very much of clothing. So I would say that the Buddha might not endorse equality as an ideal. He would, like Vivekananda, consider internal growth to be the ideal.
Yeah, so that really, I mean, now I will really show my my prejudice. I therefore think Buddha was great in his time, Shankara was great in his time, but right now, look, if you want to address the issues of the world, you better take Vivekananda seriously.
Okay.
So he says, yes, it's true, you can grow personally, but there's also a world around you, and that interaction will help you to grow much faster. In fact, I know there was one very saintly person that Ram and I knew who told us that the path of selfless work is the fastest way, all the ways that there are of evolving. The path of selfless work is the one that can take you to whatever concept of realization you have the fastest. So I think Vivekananda has again done exactly what we're talking about in the other context. Namely, he's taken the best of these ideas and then harmonized them and integrated them and put them in a way that if you absorb all of this, you can benefit from all of their ideas, not one at the exclusion of another.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Very good. Anybody else has any other questions?
Yes, I got a question.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I think it was a very nice talk and kind of different from usually what we have here. It was very interesting. One of the things I feel in your definition of smart villages or the cities, you are looking at materialistic point of view. What about humanities, personal responsibility, spirituality, and those kind of things are probably not accounted for in your definition of smart villages. What do you think about that?
So there's two answers to that. One is depends who we are talking to. So far, if we're talking to the economists, and I see there's at least one economist here, so will probably correct me if I'm wrong, that we want to phrase it in terms of the prosperity that they're used to analyzing. But the last thing I was saying is you can't get there unless you develop some of the attributes you were just mentioning. You see, that I'm claiming that static inequality is inevitable unless you have a concept of learning that has social concern built into it. So the higher attributes that you're speaking of are to be seen there. I was glad to see Heckman also speak about the importance of character, and that this has to be done by age 5 as an economist, and that's pretty good. So I think that it is there. It is there. Maybe I should, next time I give this talk, I should emphasize it more, but it definitely is there.
Well, I won't come in between two brothers, so I will let Dr. Ram Murthy ask the first question.
Yes.
Question now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so very nice talk. Certainly, by the way, I think Ajit is also the same, isn't that group of people that had the same teacher we did?
I was trying to keep it anonymous.
When he mentioned there is only one economist, he was mentioning Ajit Ranade, not me.
Yeah. So that's one. So one thing, I think the point about trying to put some of this stuff into practice. I mean, I liked what you were trying to say, but it seems to me that the most fundamental problem confronting the human race is more about the usage of things. Like, for example, how to use things properly. We are not teaching people how to use things properly, and also people in positions of power are not behaving responsibly or ideally because other people follow that. So this is what we're seeing on a growth scale. For example, technology is now being misused in some sense. You see all this misinformation that's circulated is because of people know that they can monetize the misinformation. That's what's going on right now. So at the heart of this problem seems to be this incentive for money or poverty, as you the motivation for many of these people to resort to unethical dissemination of misinformation is really money. So can we kind of address the fundamental, underlying moral and ethical, lack of moral and ethical standards that is responsible for this kind of problems, which economic problems that actually. So there might be a more fundamental problem. How do we do that? Because nobody's doing that. Nobody's schools certainly don't give education in moral and ethical behavior. And we, in the olden days, it was expected that the families did that at home. And people set even leaders, that sloka in the Bhagavad Gita, yadyadata shreshtaha tattadeve tarojanaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanuvartate. That means you want to have good examples set by our leaders. And therefore, this is where the problem seems to be. And then people are following the leaders. And then if the leaders are bad, yada raja tada praja, right? I mean, as the king sows the people. So something more fundamental, I think, is needed to solve these issues that you have raised. You want to address that?
Yeah, no, I see I have an objection with I have totally agree on one level, but I have an objection with the way people suggest this to be done. I don't agree with intervention or exogenous approaches. I think those will bound to fail. It has to be something that has been aroused from within the community. And if the community is not ready for that, from this point of view, I'm not saying there aren't other points of view. This point of view, there's nothing we can do. So I've had now conversations in villages, and what we do is we go in and ask, try to get from people an aspirational understanding of where they are. What is their aspiration? I'm not there to preach anything to them. I'm not there to tell them thou shalt not. We start with a conversation. What is their aspiration? Until those aspirations align with what you're saying, nothing that we do will be effective. And so the point, of course, is that a community is a community. Exactly that. It's not just the government. It's not just the political leaders. It's not just the economic leaders. It's not just the teachers. It's families. It's family members. Somewhere in that conversation will come up exactly these points. And when those points come up, then in our approach, we draw attention to them. This is your aspiration. You're worried about people not the mental health of people because they're addicted to their devices. You're worried about the habits of people because of their feeling of want, and therefore they're trying to compensate that with something else. That's your aspiration. So I say it has to be something that comes from within the community. But the job of what we do is to draw attention to that, their aspiration, and to present it in a whole way. A lot of these approaches, whether it's about character building, like you're saying, or whether it's about the moral or ethical values, or it's about habits, I've seen so many efforts at this kind of thing fail because somebody goes in trying to teach people something. I've told them before, I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm not here to solve your problems. I'm not trying to save you. I'm just trying to tell you, I'm going to help you yourself articulate your aspirations. So you yourself will see what it is you're after. You yourself will see, and in saying that, you'll see what was missing, and from there you will come up with the. I don't think there is a scalable solution in any other way. Yeah, a lot more to be said about it, but I this is my point of view.
Good. Well, I get the last stab, I guess. So I want, as a not a complete economist, but a half economist. But in any case, I teach economic development all the time, and I know there are at least three things I would like to comment on. Number one, if you recognize my favorite economist, Arthur Lewis's contribution on migration and urbanization, then obviously he argues that as long as the productivity is higher in urban areas and wages are higher, there is going to be this smooth transition from rural to urban areas all the time. So that is just a natural process of economic development, according to Arthur Lewis. But that's first. Second is I know the GDP insufficiency of GDP has always been talked about, whether we have enough information by just looking at GDP and economic development or not. But I love to point out a graph which on x-axis gets the per capita income, on y-axis gets any kind of happiness index, and whatever way you want to define happiness. There is a drastic and very nice relationship, upward sloping. Higher is your per capita income, greater is your happiness index. And that, I think that probably answers the question why we stick to GDP, besides being that is the most acceptable measure of economic development worldwide. There is no other one. There are capability approaches and all, but try to teach that to, or tell that to African countries, would you please publish your capabilities index? And they would say, no, I would rather have a GDP published rather than anything else measured in here. That is easier for them. And also my third point is about Piketty, because I think Piketty's main point is to argue that the inequality will continue in the future also, as long as the returns to the capital are higher than the returns to the labor. And if labor keeps on getting smaller returns and capital is getting higher returns on the capital, inequality will continue to go up in the future. So I think those are my comments. I don't know whether you agree.
So these are all good points. I would say that the only response to that is we have to disaggregate the numbers a little bit. You see, even if you take, for example, let's take just one of the things you said, measure happiness versus per capita income. The whole concept of per capita income is an average, after all. I mean, taking the total income and dividing by the population. So I need something much more granular to see what's going on. You know, if, for example, I have one urban center where things are there's a lot of wealth concentrated, and then there's a lot of rural centers where the wealth is absent, I need a way of seeing that. Number two, we live in an interesting world now where technology has done something very important. It's made possible intelligent decentralization. The very thing that I was talking about before, about the need for the factory to have everything in one place. We don't need to have everything in one place now. I can live in a rural environment and be highly connected. So it is not necessary, even from a material point of view, that I be physically in one place. And the third thing is that we live in a world where we can define how we what our employment is. We need not fit into the old models that I need to work for a company, I need to do a 9-to-5 job. No, maybe sitting in the village, I will define my own way of making a job. I'll tell you this simple thing that this guy from Berkeley told me. He went into a village. There was a weaver. His job, his tradition for many generations was to weave really beautiful saris. And then he took these and sold them in the town to a sari store, and he got maybe 50 rupees for each sari. And then, of course, they are selling them for 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is that they sell for now. So this guy Darwin, what he saw this, then he caught hold of a young girl who had just finished her education and was going to leave the village now to go to the city to get a job. And she happened to specialize in computer science. She had a degree in computer science. So he said, "Can you give me 6 months of your time? I want your help in something." Okay, I should give 6 months at a time. He said, "I want you to build a website for this guy. This is an e-commerce website." Okay. And so that he can sell his saris online. So she did it. Well, it turned out that instead of getting 50 rupees, he's now getting 10,000 rupees, a large amount of money. They started a company. This girl is the CEO. She has no reason to leave the village. If she goes to the city, certainly she's not going to be CEO anywhere. She's going to be some underling in some company. She's head of her own company. Her quality of life is good. She's getting lots of money, whatever else she wants. But the point is that that's a really simple example, but there are many, many more examples of this kind. Learning is a new asset. You can think of it as a new asset, and because of that, you can define your own economy. And so the whole aggregated way of looking at things, either at the result or the way we do things, I think now is poised for a disruption. We can do things in a different way. Thereby, you can have not only a good quality of life in a rural environment, you can even have then the leisure to think of higher things too and develop yourself beyond the economic well-being, I think. Yes, I think Rohit has a question.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what you said about the saris, and right, and so two things. One of them, there was a professor at Boston University who made an experiment, and it was about the following situation: that when people in some village in Bengal, they have grain to sell, right? They could either give it to some middleman, and then he would go into the town and sell it, right? Or they could go into the town themselves, right? And of course, the middleman took a lot of money, so that the farmer might not get as much as he should, right? So then they instituted a scheme whereby the prices in the town would be electronically transmitted to the farmers, and that the farmers could make a choice whether to go into the town and sell the grain themselves, or whether they could still use the middleman. What he found was that what the farmers were getting did not change. Oh. I don't know what moral to derive from it, but then there is an example which is perhaps more at home, which is that we know that many publishers, Springer, for example, published one of your books. Am I right? Now, it has also published some of mine. The thing about it is that Springer charges enormous amounts of money for journals, to the extent that even very rich universities are not able to buy all the journals that they want, and certainly universities in India have a very hard time. And yet, nonetheless, the fact remains that the work of research is done by academics, and these days, even the typesetting is done by academics. So right. How is it that Springer is able to make all this money? Yep. I mean, Springer doesn't have an army, so how do they manage to force us to fork out our research for them to make all this money, right? So, there's a structural issue here.
No, you're right. The only thing that Springer has that can now be challenged is the name. So the reason academics submit their works to Springer publication or Springer Journal is it gives their work clout that it was published by Springer. Okay, so what's the antidote to that? The antidote is we need not-for-profits like mathematical societies, like, for example, the Ramanujan Mathematical Society, to more actively be open to publishing. Because yes, and let them make a profit too, but they'll use that profit for the better of the community again. So we need to wake up to that. I think in some parts of the world, some people have done that. We now it's our turn. I do think, for example, American Math Society, they know full well their publications does make them a profit, but we don't mind that. We're okay with that because we know it comes back to us in the community. So we need to do that. As far as this question of farmers selling their grain and the price didn't change, the problem there might be a collusion between the people in the town, the merchants in the town, and the middleman. So that goes back to what we were discussing earlier about, how do you deal with the basic character defects, really, basically. And there is I think, though, I repeat what I said before, the way you deal with that is not by preaching to them, but by exposing it. Here it is. Here it is. Because once it's exposed, people don't like it. Yeah, I see there's a question from Amitabh.
Okay, Amitabh.
Yes, first, thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. And I like your example of the girl in the village becoming the CEO of her own company. It made me think that we have all this speculation going on right now, how AI is going to change the world and is going to do away with a lot of the entry-level jobs. And so we don't know what exactly the effect is going to be on the workforce, on the distribution of wealth, on the widening or the narrowing of inequalities. But certainly for entry level jobs, there's going to be an impact, and those people are going to have to try and decide how to move their career forward, how to move their happiness or their income potential forward. And that, I think, is not being discussed or even pondered upon by policymakers. But it's going to be a wave of enforced unemployment that we're going to have to deal with as it moves through society, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Some of us are talking about it. But by the way, let me, since we started talking about AI, let me just say there is another thing that it can do, that on the plus side, on the positive side, it can make possible a lot of access to information that I didn't have before, or that I didn't have as easily before. After all, because as we know, AI tools that we have now, more or less, they're just glorified search. It's just glorified search.
Right. But what I was thinking also, sorry to interrupt, but when you talked about more disaggregate data, which you would like to know instead of the averages, which all of us know averages cover up all the wealth of the granular data. But AI, I was thinking that time is one of the sources we could use that might help us to get to more granular sources of information.
Absolutely. We know now, we know how to handle high dimensional data. And by the way, I always, whenever the subject comes up, I want to emphasize also there's a purely mathematical way of dealing with high dimensional data also, not just by machine learning. It's called algebraic topology. It's called topological data analysis, and uses properties of the shape of the data cloud to extract invariants, which tell you either properties of the cloud or even characterize the cloud. And if you look at machine learning methods of dimension reduction, you see usually real world data lives in too high a dimension to be practical. So the first thing machine learning algorithms do, is to try to do dimension reduction. And they do this in a kind of trial and error way. But TDA will give you a way of doing dimension reduction much more efficiently. So if you use the two in combination, TDA and machine learning, you'll get a much more efficient way of analyzing high dimensional data. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was news to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Murthy. I know it's been 1.5.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for the presentation. And we loved it. It was wonderful. And we will obviously come back again in November. The date is kind of finalized, but we will be back in November and also December, and then January we are talking to people. Very good. Thank you for being here.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.